Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Late October of 2022 found me pulling double shifts at a Sunoco station just outside Columbus, Ohio, desperately trying to save up enough money to finally move out of my sister's basement. My 30th birthday had passed 2 months earlier, marked only by a gas station cupcake and a text from my mom asking when I'd get my life together. Not exactly a milestone celebration after dropping out of nursing school, but the night shifts paid decent, and usually nobody bothered me past midnight. The station sat at the corner of Route 23 and some back road whose name I never bothered learning, surrounded by nothing but cornfields and the occasional farmhouse with windows that glowed yellow in the distance. That particular Thursday night had been dead since around 9, just me restocking the energy drinks and counting down the minutes until I could flip the sign and lock up at 2 in the morning. The woman came in at exactly 1:47. I remember because I'd just checked my phone, calculating how much longer until I could close the register and start mopping. She pushed through the door so quietly that the bell barely made a sound, just this soft metallic whisper that made me glance up from the inventory clipboard. She wore this long beige coat that went down past her knees, the kind my grandmother used to call a duster, and her dark hair hung perfectly straight like she'd just brushed it 100 times. But it was her walk that caught my attention first. She moved across the floor without any of the usual sounds, no squeaking sneakers or clicking heels, just this weird gliding motion that reminded me of someone ice skating. When she reached the counter, she stood there for maybe 10 seconds without saying anything, just staring at a point somewhere behind my left ear. And when she finally spoke, her voice came out in this steady, measured rhythm like she was reading from a script she'd memorized. "May I have the key to your bathroom, please?" Each word dropped from her mouth with the exact same spacing between them. No rush, no pause for breath. Just this mechanical delivery that made the fluorescent lights above us seem suddenly too bright. Her hands stayed hidden in her coat pockets the entire time, and I noticed she hadn't blinked once since walking in. Those brown eyes just stayed wide open, the whites showing all around like someone had told her to keep them that way. The bathroom key hung on this ridiculous, oversized wooden paddle behind me, a system my manager Gary implemented after too many people walked off with it. And when I turned to grab it, I felt her presence shift closer to the counter, even though I never heard her move. The smell hit me then, not unpleasant but wrong somehow, like fresh laundry detergent mixed with something metallic, something that reminded me of the taste you get in your mouth right before you faint. I handed her the key and watched her fingers emerge from the coat pocket to take it. Pale, almost bluish under the harsh store lighting, with nails filed down to nothing. She wrapped her hand around the wooden paddle without actually gripping it, just sort of letting it rest against her palm, and then she turned and glided toward the bathroom at the back of the store. The bathroom was maybe 30 feet from the counter, past the coffee machines and the wall of chips, and I watched her the whole way, waiting to hear her footsteps, but there was nothing except the hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of that one broken light fixture near the ATM. She reached the bathroom door, turned the handle with that same loose grip, and disappeared inside. The door closed with this heavy thunk that seemed too loud for how gently she'd pushed it. And then everything went quiet again, just me standing there behind the register, wondering why my chest felt so tight. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and I started getting anxious about closing time. The register still needed counting, the floors needed mopping, and I had this whole checklist Gary would review on the security cameras if I didn't complete it. But the woman hadn't come out yet, and the bathroom key was supposed to be returned to the counter. That was the whole point of the giant wooden paddle, to make sure people brought it back. At the 15-minute mark, I walked over to the bathroom door and knocked, first softly, then harder when I got no response. "Ma'am, everything okay in there? We're closing in about 20 minutes. Nothing. Not even the sound of running water or the toilet flushing. Just this complete silence that made me press my ear against the door. The wood felt cold, way colder than it should have been, like someone had left a freezer open on the other side. That's when I heard it. Slam. The bathroom door hitting something hard, like someone had shoved it open with tremendous force. But I was standing right there, my hand still on the door handle, and it hadn't moved at all. The slam came from inside, from behind the door I was touching, which made no sense because there was nothing back there but a toilet, a sink, and 3 walls. I jumped back and waited, expecting the woman to come out, maybe embarrassed about dropping something or falling, but the door stayed shut. Another minute crawled by before I tried the handle. Locked, of course, because that's how our bathroom worked. You needed the key to get in or out. My master key was in the office, and as I walked back there to get it, I kept glancing over my shoulder at that door, waiting for another slam that never came. The office was this cramped space behind the counter, barely big enough for a desk and the security monitor setup. My hands fumbled with the key ring while my eyes stayed glued to the bathroom door through the office window, still closed, still silent. When I finally found the master key and headed back, I noticed something that made me stop mid-step. The coffee pot, which I'd turned off an hour ago, was steaming. Not brewing, just steaming, like someone had poured boiling water into the empty carafe. The smell of burnt metal filled that corner of the store, and I had to cover my nose as I passed. At the bathroom door, I hesitated with the key in my hand, suddenly not wanting to know what was on the other side. But I had to check. Gary would review the cameras tomorrow, and how would I explain leaving someone locked in our bathroom overnight? The key turned easily, and I pushed the door open to find nothing. An empty bathroom, spotless like it had just been cleaned. No woman in a beige coat, no sign anyone had been there at all. The toilet seat was down, the sink was dry, even the trash can was empty except for the liner I'd put in during my shift. But the wooden paddle key wasn't there either. Not on the floor, not on the sink, nowhere. The fluorescent bulb above the mirror flickered once, casting weird shadows that made me back out quickly. I stood there in the chip aisle, staring at that empty bathroom, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The woman had definitely gone in there. I'd watched her, handed her the key myself, heard that door slam from the inside. Where could she have gone? There were no windows, no other doors, just those 3 walls and a 7-foot ceiling with panels that hadn't been disturbed in years. My first thought was to check outside. Maybe she'd somehow slipped past me when I went to the office, though I'd been watching that door the whole time through the window. The parking lot sat empty under those harsh sodium lights that turned everything orange. Just my beat-up Ford, and the dumpster out back casting long shadows across the asphalt. No other cars. No woman walking down Route 23. Nothing but corn stalks swaying in the October wind. The night had gotten colder, probably dropping into the 40s, and my breath came out in little white puffs as I walked the perimeter of the building. That's when I saw it, the wooden paddle key hanging from the outside door handle, swinging back and forth like someone had just placed it there seconds ago. Not dropped, not thrown, but carefully looped through the handle from the outside. My stomach did this weird flip as I grabbed it, the wood still carrying that strange coldness I'd felt on the bathroom door. Back inside, I locked the door and went straight to the office to check the security footage. We had 4 cameras, one on the register, one on the door, one covering the store floor, and one outside for the pumps. I rewound to 147, watching myself at the counter doing inventory, and then nothing. No woman entering the store. The door never opened, the bell never moved, but there I was on screen, looking up from my clipboard at absolutely nothing. Then the worst part, I watched myself turn around, grab the wooden paddle from the hook, and hold it out to empty air. My hand on the screen opened and closed like I was receiving something back, and then the paddle disappeared from view as I apparently handed it to nobody. On the camera, I was having a complete conversation with thin air, nodding and watching something move across the store that didn't exist in the footage. The bathroom door opened and closed by itself on the store floor camera, and then there I was, 15 minutes later, knocking on the door and talking to no one. I sat in that office chair for 20 minutes, replaying the footage over and over. trying to find any sign of the woman in the beige coat. Each replay made my skin prickle worse than before, especially the part where I held out my hand and the paddle key just vanished into nothing. The timestamp never changed. The footage never glitched. Everything looked perfectly normal except for the fact that I was interacting with someone who wasn't there. My mind raced through explanations, hallucinations, gas leak, exhaustion from too many double shifts, maybe even something wrong with the cameras. But the key had been real, the cold bathroom door had been real, and that slam from inside had definitely happened. I even pulled up the audio from the door camera and could hear my side of the conversation clear as day. "May I have the key to your bathroom, please?" Except it was just my voice asking, followed by silence where her response should have been. I never told Gary about what happened that night. How could I? The footage made me look insane, and I needed this job too badly to risk getting fired over something I couldn't explain. I finished my shift, mopped the floors, counted the register, and left everything exactly as it should be. But I couldn't stop thinking about that woman. The way she moved without sound, that perfectly measured voice, those unblinking eyes that had seemed so real when I was looking right at her. For weeks afterward, I'd tense up whenever someone came in late at night, especially women in long coats. The bathroom key still hangs on its wooden paddle behind the counter, and sometimes when I'm working alone, I catch myself staring at it, remembering that October night. I've never had anything like that happen again, and honestly, I hope I never do. Some things don't need explaining, and they just need to be survived and then left alone, filed away in that part of your brain where you keep the stuff that doesn't make sense but definitely happened. The drive from Phoenix to Denver had become second nature after doing it twice a year for the past 5 years. At 26, visiting my sister and her kids was the highlight of my otherwise predictable life as an accountant. That particular Friday in August started like any other trip, throwing a duffel bag in my Camry around 8 at night, planning to drive straight through and catch breakfast with my nephews Saturday morning. The desert heat was finally breaking as darkness fell, and I remember feeling energized about the 14-hour stretch ahead. My phone was loaded with new podcasts, the cooler packed with Red Bulls and water bottles, and I had that familiar excitement of hitting the open road when most people were settling in for the night. The first few hours flew by, with me singing along to old songs and watching the city lights fade into the darkness of the desert. Around 2 in the morning, somewhere past Flagstaff but still a good distance from the New Mexico border, my fuel gauge started hovering near empty. The highway had been particularly desolate for the last hour. Just me, the occasional long-haul trucker, and miles of darkness broken only by our headlights cutting through the night. My GPS showed a gas station about 3 miles ahead, someplace called Desert Stop 24, right off exit 287. The name didn't ring any bells from previous trips, but new stations pop up all the time along these routes, especially the generic 24-hour places that cater to travelers like me. As I took the exit, the station came into view. A small, isolated building with 4 pumps under harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look washed out and strange. Only one other vehicle was there, a beat-up pickup truck parked off to the side, not at any of the pumps. I pulled up to pump number 3, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cool desert air. The silence hit me immediately. That complete absence of sound you only get in the middle of nowhere, where even the insects seem to have gone to bed. The credit card reader on the pump was one of those ancient models that takes forever to process, and while I waited, I glanced through the station's windows. The fluorescent lights inside were even harsher than the ones above the pumps, creating this stark, almost medical brightness that made the aisles look like they belonged in a hospital rather than a convenience store. I could see someone behind the counter, just a silhouette from where I stood, not moving much, maybe reading something. After what felt like minutes, the pump finally approved my card, and I started filling up, leaning against my car and scrolling through my phone while the numbers on the display slowly climbed. The receipt printed with that distinctive grinding sound old printers make, and as I reached for it, something made me pause. There was writing on it, not the usual printed text about gallons purchased and price per gallon, but actual handwriting in blue pen, scrawled across the white paper in rushed, uneven letters. "Don't go inside. Call 911. My first thought was that someone was messing with me. Maybe the last customer playing some stupid prank. I even looked around, half expecting to see teenagers hiding behind the dumpster with their phones out, recording my reaction for some social media video. But there was nobody, just me, my car, that abandoned pickup, and the two bright stations sitting there like a glowing box in the darkness. The handwriting looked fresh though, the ink still slightly smudged where someone had gripped the paper too hard while writing. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, just staring at those words while the pump handle clicked in my hand, signaling the tank was full. Part of me wanted to just get back in my car and leave, but I needed caffeine badly, and my bladder was starting to protest after 3 Red Bulls. Plus, the rational part of my brain kept insisting this had to be a joke. Who leaves warning notes on gas pump receipts? If something was really wrong, wouldn't they just call the cops themselves? I put the pump handle back, crumpled the receipt into my pocket, and walked toward the entrance. The automatic doors wheezed open with a mechanical groan that sounded like they hadn't been serviced in years, and the air conditioning hit me like a wall. Way too cold for a desert night, cranked up to meat locker levels. The smell hit me next. This weird combination of industrial floor cleaner and something else, something metallic and sharp that sat in the back of my throat. The guy behind the counter looked up when I entered, and immediately something felt wrong about the whole picture. He was wearing a Desert Stop 24 uniform shirt that was at least 2 sizes too small, stretched tight across his chest and arms, like he'd grabbed the wrong shirt from a locker. His name tag said Brandon, but it was crooked, held on by 1 pin instead of 2. But it was his face that really got me. He had this expression like someone had just told him his dog died, but he had to keep smiling for a photo. His eyes kept flicking to something behind me, then to the back of the store where a door marked "Employees Only" stood slightly ajar, then back to me, never quite making actual eye contact. When he spoke, his voice came out all wrong, too high and strained, like he was being squeezed around the middle. "Help you?" Not "can I help you" or "how's it going?" Just "help you?" Like he'd forgotten how customer service greetings were supposed to work. "Just need to use the bathroom," I said, trying to keep my voice casual even though every instinct was starting to scream at me to leave. Brandon's face twitched, this little spasm around his left eye, and he pointed toward the back without saying anything. That's when I noticed his hand. There were dark stains under his fingernails, reddish-brown like dried rust or maybe blood, and his knuckles had fresh scratches across them. As I started walking toward the bathroom, I heard it. A soft thump from behind that employee door, like something heavy shifting position. Brandon immediately started coughing, these loud, fake-sounding coughs that nobody would believe were real, clearly trying to cover up the noise. The bathroom was past the employee door, down this narrow hallway lined with boxes of inventory, and as I walked by that slightly open door, I caught a glimpse of movement through the crack. Someone was in there, standing very still in the darkness, and I could just make out the outline of what looked like a shoulder and part of an arm pressed against the wall, like they were hiding just out of sight. My whole body went rigid, but I forced myself to keep walking normally, like I hadn't seen anything. The bathroom door was one of those heavy metal ones that locks from the inside, and the second I got in there, I turned the deadbolt and pulled out my phone. My fingers were trembling as I pulled the crumpled receipt from my pocket and looked at it again. The warning was still there, that messy blue handwriting suddenly seeming a lot less like a prank and a lot more like someone's desperate attempt to save my life. Through the thin walls, I could hear voices now. Brandon's high, stressed tone and another voice, deeper and angrier, coming from that employee room. They were arguing about something, though I couldn't make out the words. Then I heard a third voice, muffled and weak, saying something that sounded like "please." That's when the reality hit me. Whoever wrote that note was probably the real Brandon, and these people, whoever they were, had him somewhere in that back room. I pulled up the phone's keypad and started dialing 911, but then stopped. There was no cell signal, not even one bar. The bathroom had no windows, just a ventilation grate near the ceiling that was way too small to squeeze through. And the only way out was back through that hallway, past the employee door, past whoever was hiding there. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds trying to think, when footsteps started coming down the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped right outside the bathroom door. The handle jiggled once, twice, then whoever it was knocked. 3 solid bangs that echoed in the small space. "You okay in there?" It was the fake Brandon's voice, but different now, lower and more controlled, like he'd dropped the act. "Been in there a while, friend. Everything all right?" The word friend came out sharp and cold, nothing friendly about it at all. Flushed the toilet and ran the water, buying time. My mind racing through options that all seemed to end with me not making it out of this place. "Yeah, just a minute," I called back. Surprised my voice came out steady when every muscle in my body was wound tight as piano wire. The footsteps didn't move away. I could see the shadow of feet under the door gap, just standing there, waiting. I turned the water off and knew I had to make a choice fast. Staying locked in here wasn't an option. They'd eventually force the door or wait me out. My car keys were in my pocket, my Camry sitting maybe 40 feet from the entrance, still running smooth from the fill-up. But those 40 feet might as well have been 40 miles if they decided to stop me. Then I remembered the pickup truck parked off to the side. If these guys had driven here, it was probably theirs, which meant at least 2 of them, maybe more. The shadow under the door shifted, and I heard him lean against the door, testing its strength with a subtle push that made the metal creak. Time was running out, and that note in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. Someone's last attempt to prevent exactly what was about to happen to me. I made my decision. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and pulled it open fast, like ripping off a Band-Aid. The fake Brandon stumbled back a step, clearly not expecting me to come out so suddenly. "Sorry, man," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. "Those gas station burritos from earlier really did a number on me." He stared at me for a second, his eyes flat and calculating, then stepped aside to let me pass. Walking down that hallway felt like walking through quicksand, every step deliberate and measured, trying not to run when every cell in my body was screaming to sprint. As I passed the employee door, it had been pulled completely shut, but I could hear movement inside, shuffling feet, and what sounded like someone being dragged across the floor. The fake Brandon was right behind me, following close enough that I could hear his breathing, this ragged sound like he was fighting to keep himself under control. When we reached the main store area, I saw the second man, tall and thin with a shaved head, wearing jeans and a black jacket despite the August heat, standing by the entrance like he'd been waiting there the whole time. "Bathroom's all yours," I said to nobody in particular, trying to project casual indifference while my legs carried me toward the door. The tall man moved slightly, not quite blocking my path but positioning himself so I'd have to brush past him to leave. Up close, I could see a tattoo creeping up his neck, some kind of snake or dragon design that disappeared into his collar, and his eyes were bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. "Forgot something," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "You didn't pay for gas." My heart nearly stopped, but I managed to pull the receipt from my pocket, the one with the warning, and held it up, careful to keep the written side facing me. "Already paid at the pump," I said. He looked at the receipt, then at me, then at fake Brandon, who had moved behind the counter again. For 5 seconds, that felt like 5 hours. Nobody moved. Then the tall man stepped aside, just barely enough for me to squeeze past. "Drive safe," he said, and there was something in those 2 words that made them sound like a threat rather than well wishes. The moment I pushed through those automatic doors, I speed-walked to my car, every instinct telling me not to run because running would confirm I knew something was wrong. My fingers fumbled with the keys as I heard the doors wheeze open behind me again, and when I glanced back, both men were standing just inside the entrance, watching me through the glass. The Camry started on the first try, and I reversed out of there faster than was safe, my tires squealing against the concrete. As I pulled onto the access road, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw them still standing there, two dark silhouettes against the harsh fluorescent backdrop. My phone suddenly buzzed with signal as I merged onto the highway, and I immediately pulled over about a mile down, my whole body shaking now that the adrenaline was starting to wear off. The 911 operator answered on the second ring, and I told her everything. The note, the fake employee, the voices in the back room, the second man by the door. She kept me on the line while units were dispatched, and I sat there on the shoulder of the highway, watching my mirrors for any sign of that pickup truck following me. 20 minutes later, I was giving my statement to a state trooper while 3 patrol cars and an ambulance surrounded that gas station like a scene from a movie. They found the real Brandon, a 19-year-old kid who'd been working the night shift, tied up with zip ties and duct tape in the storage room, beaten pretty badly but alive. The 2 men were brothers named Jason and Kyle Brennan, both with outstanding warrants for armed robbery in Nevada, apparently hitting isolated gas stations along remote highways. The kid had managed to write that warning on a stack of receipt paper when they first came in and threatened him with a gun, hoping someone would see it before walking into their trap. The trooper told me I was lucky. Most people would have ignored the note or thought it was a joke, and the brothers had gotten increasingly desperate and violent with each robbery. They'd been in there for 3 hours before I showed up, waiting for the perfect victim, someone traveling alone in the middle of the night with out-of-state plates. The younger kid from the ambulance, Brandon, asked to talk to me before they took him to the hospital, his face swollen and one eye completely shut, and he just said, "Thanks for calling," in this raspy voice that broke a little at the end. The night shift at Riverside Medical Center changes you in ways you never expect. That particular Monday in early September 2017, the exhaustion hit different than usual. 3 cardiac arrests during my shift, 2 of them kids, and the paperwork kept me there until almost 4:30 in the morning. 12 hours of watching monitors flatline, holding family members while they sobbed, pumping chests that wouldn't respond. It all sits heavy on your shoulders during that long drive home. The highway stretched ahead of me like a black ribbon, my headlights cutting through patches of fog that rolled in from the cornfields on either side. Living 40 miles outside the city meant cheaper rent, but nights like these made me question if saving $600 a month was worth it. At 32, I'd been doing this routine for 3 years, and my body was starting to rebel against it. The fuel gauge had been hovering near empty for the last 10 miles, that orange light glaring at me like an accusation, and I knew I'd been pushing my luck. The Valero station appeared through the fog like something out of nowhere, one of those places you pass 100 times without really seeing it. Maybe 15 miles from Riverside, another 25 from my apartment, tucked between 2 massive stretches of farmland where the county road intersects with Highway 47. The fluorescent canopy lights were still blazing bright, which surprised me since most places this far out shut down by midnight. Relief washed through me as I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires louder than it should have been in all that silence. My Corolla sputtered a bit as I rolled up to pump number 3, probably running on fumes at that point. The place looked rough around the edges, with rust eating at the metal supports and one of the price display numbers hanging crooked. But beggars can't be choosers when you're running on empty at 4 in the morning. I grabbed my debit card and stepped out into the humid September air, that thick wetness that makes your scrubs stick to your skin immediately. The silence hit me first. No insects buzzing, no distant traffic, just the electric hum of those overhead lights. When I tried the pump handle, nothing happened. The screen stayed dark, no prompts, no card reader lighting up. I walked around to pump 4, then 2, then 1, all dead. Through the station windows, I could see the lights were on inside, rows of chips and candy bars visible on the shelves, though they looked picked over with big gaps between products. The door had one of those back in 5 minutes signs, but the paper looked yellowed and warped, like it had been there for weeks. I pulled the handle anyway, but it was locked tight. My phone showed 4:47 a.m., and according to the hours posted on the glass, they should have been open 24/7. That's when I noticed the car at the far end of the lot, barely visible in the shadows beyond the reach of the canopy lights. A silver sedan, maybe a Nissan Altima, parked crooked across two spaces with the driver's door hanging wide open. The interior light was on, casting a weak yellow glow that made the fog around it look sickly. No movement, no sound, just that door gaping open like a mouth. Something about seeing that made my chest tighten. Who leaves their car door open at an empty gas station in the middle of nowhere? I stood there for a moment, trying to decide if I should check it out or just get back in my car and pray I had enough fumes to make it to the next station. The rational part of my brain, the nurse part that deals with emergencies every night, told me someone might need help. Maybe they'd had a medical emergency. Maybe they were inside the store. I walked toward the abandoned car, my white nursing shoes squeaking against the damp concrete. The fog seemed thicker here, swirling around my ankles like cold fingers. As I got closer, I could see the interior better. Fast food wrappers scattered on the passenger seat, a phone charger still plugged into the outlet, dangling loose. The keys were gone from the ignition. No blood, no signs of struggle, just abandoned. The back seats were empty too, but there was a purse on the floor, contents spilled out. Lipstick, receipts, a wallet gaping open. I called out a hesitant, "Hello?" But my voice seemed to die just a few feet from my mouth, swallowed by the fog and that oppressive silence. I touched the hood of the car with my palm, stone cold. Whatever happened here, it wasn't recent. The area behind the gas station was just darkness and more farmland, corn stalks barely visible in the distance like an army of shadows. Walking back toward the store, I decided to check around the side of the building. Maybe there was an employee entrance. Maybe someone was taking a smoke break or dealing with inventory in the back. The concrete was cracked and uneven here, weeds pushing through in places, and a dumpster sat against the wall, lid slightly askew. There were no other cars in the employee area, which seemed strange for a place that was supposedly open. Around the corner, I found a back door, metal scratched up with a small window at head height. I knocked hard, the sound echoing off the brick walls. "Hey, anyone working? I need gas." Nothing. I stood on my tiptoes to peer through the little window, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the glare. I could see into what looked like a storage room, boxes stacked on metal shelves, a mop bucket in the corner, and beyond that a doorway leading to the main store area. The lights were definitely on in there, bright fluorescent, and I could make out the edge of the counter, the lottery ticket display, the cigarette rack behind it. That's when I saw it, a faint bluish glow from behind the counter, different from the harsh overhead lights. It was flickering slightly, like a television or computer monitor. If someone was working, they might be back there doing inventory or watching security cameras. I moved along the back wall, looking for another window that might give me a better angle. There was one, smaller and dirtier, but positioned so I could see more of the area behind the counter if I pressed myself against the brick and craned my neck. The muscles in my calves burned from standing on my toes and my breath fogged up the glass. I had to wipe it with my sleeve twice before I could see clearly. There were multiple monitors back there, security camera feeds all showing different angles of the gas station. The quality was grainy, black and white, but I could make out the pumps, the parking lot, the store interior. On one of the screens, I could see the abandoned car with its door still open. On another, the inside of the store, those half-empty shelves I'd noticed earlier. Then my eyes found the monitor showing the back of the building, right where I was standing. The timestamp at the bottom read 4:52 a.m. current time, and there I was, a small figure in scrubs pressed against the window. But something was wrong with the image. At first, I thought it was just the poor quality of the camera, maybe a delay or ghosting effect. But no, there was definitely another figure in the frame, standing maybe 10 feet behind where I was. Just standing there, completely still, watching me look through the window. My whole body went rigid, every muscle tensing at once. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. Just stared at that monitor showing someone or something behind me in real time. The figure wasn't moving at all, just standing there in the shadows at the edge of the camera's range. I forced myself to turn my head slowly, so slowly to look behind me. Nothing, just the empty lot stretching out into fog and darkness, the cornfields beyond barely visible. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, that rushing sound like when you hold a seashell up to your head. I whipped back to the monitor, and the figure was gone from the screen too. Just me, alone, trembling against that filthy window. But then I noticed something else on the monitors, the one showing the store interior near the candy aisle. There was someone in there. A woman standing perfectly still between the shelves, facing away from the camera. Long, dark hair hanging straight down her back, wearing what looked like a light-colored dress or maybe a hospital gown. She wasn't moving, wasn't shopping, just standing there like a mannequin. I shifted to get a better look at the screen, squinting through the dirty glass, and that's when the woman's head started to turn. Slowly, mechanically, like something on a timer. She turned until she was facing the camera directly, and even through the grainy footage, even through the dirty window, I could see she was looking right at where the camera would be mounted, looking at the monitor, looking at me watching her. I stumbled backward from the window, my heel catching on a crack in the concrete. The woman on the monitor hadn't moved again, just stood there facing the camera with her arms hanging loose at her sides. I couldn't make out her features clearly through the poor video quality, but something about her posture, the way she held herself, made my skin prickle with recognition. Like when you see someone from behind in a crowd and think you know them, that split second of familiarity before your brain catches up. I needed to get out of there, forget the gas, just drive until the car died and then figure it out from there. But as I started backing away toward my car, I heard it. The electronic chime of a door opening. That specific two-note sound every convenience store door makes. My eyes darted to the front of the building. The door that had been locked tight 5 minutes ago was now standing wide open, the fluorescent light from inside spilling out onto the concrete. Every instinct screamed at me to run to my car, but I couldn't move. The door just hung there, open, inviting, with no one visible inside from my angle. The "back in 5 minutes" sign was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there. I could hear the faint sound of music drifting out, some generic instrumental version of a song I couldn't place, tinny and distorted. My legs finally responded and I started moving toward my car, keeping my eyes on that open door, but I had to pass by the front of the store to get to my Corolla. As I got closer, I could see inside better. The overhead lights buzzing, the coffee machine's LED display blinking 12 hours like it had just been reset, and there, behind the counter, was the woman from the monitor. She was facing the register, her back to me, that same long dark hair, that same light-colored clothing. Her hands were on the counter, fingers spread wide, and she wasn't moving at all. Not breathing, not shifting her weight, nothing. Like someone had paused her mid-action. I was maybe 15 feet from my car when she spoke. Not loud, but clear enough to carry through the open door and across the humid air. "Pump 3 is ready now, honey." Her voice was wrong, too flat, too measured, like someone reading phonetically from a card. She still hadn't turned around. My hand fumbled for my car keys in my pocket, fingers slippery with sweat. "I don't need gas anymore," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "Thank you." She laughed then, this hollow sound that went on just a beat too long, and finally started to turn around. I didn't wait to see her face. I yanked my car door open, jammed the key in the ignition, and the engine turned over on the first try. In my rearview mirror, as I peeled out spraying gravel, I could see her standing in the doorway of the station. Even from that distance, even in the pre-dawn darkness, I could see what made my brain refuse to process what I was seeing. She was wearing scrubs, the same shade of blue as mine, the same hospital logo on the chest, and her face. I only glimpsed it for a second before I hit the highway, but that was enough. It was like looking at a photograph of myself that someone had left in water too long, features slightly blurred and wrong, but still recognizably me. My car ran out of gas 7 miles down the highway. I coasted to the shoulder and called 911 from there, sitting in my locked car until the state trooper arrived with a gas can at sunrise. When I told him about the Valero station, he looked at me strange and said there wasn't any gas station on that stretch of road, hadn't been for years. The nearest one was 12 miles in the opposite direction. I made him drive back with me to check, following in my car, and sure enough, there was nothing there but an overgrown lot with the concrete foundation of what used to be a building, weeds growing through the cracks, a rusty chain-link fence around the perimeter. No pumps, no canopy, no store. Just empty land and a historical marker sign I hadn't noticed in the dark that read, "Site of Morning Glory Truck Stop, demolished 2003 after fire claimed 7 lives." I called in sick for the next 3 nights. When I finally went back to work, I switched to day shift permanently, taking the pay cut without complaint. I never found out what happened to the woman with the abandoned car, if she was even real. And I never drive that stretch of Highway 47 anymore. Sometimes, when I'm washing my hands in the hospital bathroom and catch my reflection in the mirror, I remember her standing behind that counter with my face, and I have to look away. "22, and finishing my senior year at college. That Friday night in early May should have been just another boring drive home. My roommate had bailed on me last minute for the weekend trip to visit my cousin's new baby, leaving me to make the 3-hour drive back alone. The interstate stretched empty ahead of me, nothing but darkness and the occasional 18-wheeler passing by. My old Nissan Altima had been making weird noises all week, kind of a grinding sound whenever I turned left, but I figured it would hold up for one more trip before I could get it checked out on Monday. Around 11:30, the fuel gauge dipped below a quarter tank, and I pulled off at one of those lonely gas stations that seem to exist solely for desperate travelers like me. The place had that eerie fluorescent glow that makes everything look washed out and strange, with moths batting themselves senseless against the overhead lights. The credit card reader on the pump was broken, naturally, so I had to walk inside to pay. Behind the counter sat this older woman with thick glasses and a crossword puzzle book, barely glancing up as I handed her 2 20s for pump 3. While she counted out my change, movement outside caught my attention through the grimy window. A man in a dark hoodie walked past my car, his face completely hidden in shadow, moving with this odd, deliberate slowness, like he was studying something. He disappeared behind the row of pumps on the far side, and I waited to see him emerge near another vehicle or head toward the store, but he just vanished into that blind spot between the lights. The cashier handed me my change and mumbled something about being safe out there, her eyes never quite meeting mine, which seemed weird, but whatever. Maybe she was just tired from the late shift. Back at my car, I did that automatic scan you do in empty parking lots at night, checking the back seat through the window before getting in. Nothing there except my duffel bag and some empty water bottles rolling around on the floor. The pump clicked off at $38 and change, and I replaced the nozzle, still thinking about that hooded guy who'd walked past. Where the hell did he go? There were no other cars at the station besides mine and what looked like the cashier's beat-up Chevy parked around the side. Maybe he'd walked to the restroom or something, though I hadn't seen any signs for one outside. Whatever, not my problem. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors immediately, and pulled back onto the interstate, cranking up some music to keep myself awake for the remaining hour and a half. About 20 minutes later, just as I was getting into the rhythm of the drive, zoning out to the monotony of the highway, I heard it. This soft tapping sound, barely audible over the music. At first I thought maybe it was something in the engine, that grinding noise finally getting worse. But no, this was different, more rhythmic, almost deliberate. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 pause. It seemed to be coming from the passenger side of the car. I turned down the music and listened harder, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. The sound stopped for a moment, then started again, definitely coming from the passenger door area. My brain immediately went to logical explanations. Probably just road debris stuck somewhere, or maybe the wind hitting something loose on that side of the car. I cranked the music back up, trying to ignore it, but now that I'd heard it, I couldn't unhear it. The next exit was still 15 miles away, according to the green sign that flashed past in my headlights. I kept stealing glances at the passenger door, expecting to see something, anything that would explain the noise. The tapping got louder, more insistent, like someone knocking to get my attention. My whole body tensed up, and I found myself leaning away from that side of the car without even realizing it. Then, movement in my peripheral vision made me jerk the wheel slightly. The passenger door handle was moving, just barely. These tiny little lifts, like someone was testing it from the outside. But that was impossible, right? I was doing 70 miles per hour on an interstate. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting, trying to process what I was seeing. Maybe the door mechanism was broken. Maybe it was just vibrating from the speed. Maybe. I reached over without taking my eyes off the road and pushed down on the lock button again, even though I knew it was already locked. For a few minutes, everything went quiet. No tapping, no handle moving, just the hum of the tires on asphalt and my heart hammering against my ribs. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it all, stress from finals week finally catching up with me. Then my phone, sitting in the cup holder, lit up with a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. Let me in. My foot involuntarily lifted off the gas pedal for a second before I forced myself to maintain speed. I didn't touch the phone, didn't respond, just kept driving while my mind raced through possibilities. Could someone have gotten my number from somewhere? Was this some sick coincidence? The rational part of my brain kept insisting this had to be a prank, but the timing was too perfect, too specific. Another text came through. Getting cold out here. I wanted to pull over, to get out and check, to prove to myself that there was nobody there, but every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, to not stop no matter what. The exit finally appeared, and I took it way too fast, tires squealing as I curved around the ramp. There was a Shell station right off the highway, blazing with lights and, thank God, people. A family was loading into their minivan. A trucker was fueling up his rig. Normal people doing normal things. I pulled in and parked right under the brightest light I could find, directly in front of the store windows. For a solid minute, I just sat there, engine running, staring at the passenger side of my car through the mirrors. Nothing. No one. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and checked those texts again, but they were gone. Not deleted, just gone, like they'd never existed. My message history showed nothing from any unknown number. That sick feeling in my stomach got worse. Either I was losing it, or something genuinely fucked up was happening, and I wasn't sure which option scared me more. A knock on my window made me jump so hard I bit my tongue. It was just the gas station attendant, a young guy maybe 19 or 20, looking concerned. I rolled down my window just a crack, and he asked if I was okay. Said I'd been sitting there for almost 10 minutes just staring. 10 minutes? It had felt like maybe 2 at most. I told him I was fine, just tired from driving, needed a moment to rest. He nodded but kept glancing at my passenger door with this strange expression, then asked if I knew my door was open. My blood turned to ice water. The passenger door was slightly ajar, maybe an inch or 2, the interior light somehow not triggered. I knew. Absolutely knew the door had been locked. I'd checked it multiple times. The attendant offered to close it for me, already walking around the car, but I practically screamed at him to stop, to get back. He jumped away, hands up, probably thinking I was completely insane. I got out of the car on my side, legs shaky, and walked around the back, keeping my distance from that open door. The attendant was still standing there, confused and a little scared of me now. I asked him, trying to keep my voice steady, if he'd seen anyone near my car when I pulled in. He shook his head, said I'd been alone the whole time, but then he hesitated and added something that made my knees nearly buckle. He said when I first pulled up, it looked like my passenger seat was pushed way back, like someone tall had been sitting there, but now it was in its normal position. I looked through the window, and sure enough, The seat was exactly where I always kept it, adjusted for my backpack when I occasionally had a passenger. But I could see the track marks on the floor mat, those little indentations where the seat had recently been moved. Fresh scratches in the plastic rail that hadn't been there before. My purse, which I always kept on the passenger floor, was now on the seat. Contents spilled out like someone had been digging through it. The attendant suggested calling the police, but what would I even tell them? That someone might have been riding on the outside of my car? That I got mysterious disappearing texts? They'd think I was high or having some kind of breakdown. Instead, I asked him to watch while I checked the car. I used my phone's flashlight to look under the seats, in the back, even popped the trunk. Everything seemed normal except for one detail that made me want to abandon the car right there. On the passenger door handle, the outside one, there were smudges in the dust and pollen that had accumulated during my weekend trip. But these weren't normal fingerprints. They were long, dragging marks like someone had been holding on with their fingertips while the car was moving, gripping so hard they'd scraped through the grime. The metal underneath showed through in 4 parallel lines. I took photos with my phone, hands shaking so bad most of them came out blurry. But I needed proof that I wasn't going crazy. The attendant stayed with me while I called my dad, who lived about 40 minutes away. While we waited, he told me something that still gives me nightmares. About a month earlier, another girl had come in around the same time of night, hysterical, saying someone had been clinging to her car. They'd reviewed the security footage, but the cameras only covered the pump area, not where she'd parked. The police hadn't found anything, but she'd refused to get back in her car, had someone pick her up instead. The car sat there for 3 days before she came back with her boyfriend to get it. They found muddy handprints all over the passenger side that hadn't been there when she'd abandoned it. The attendant said the weirdest part was that the mud had bits of fabric in it, like from thick gloves or maybe clothing, as if someone had been gripping so hard the material had worn away. He'd tried to follow up, curious about what happened, but the girl had deleted all her social media and seemingly disappeared. Her boyfriend told people she'd transferred schools, moved back home with her parents, wouldn't talk about that night at all. My dad arrived in his pickup truck, baseball bat visible in the back window, looking ready for war. He'd brought my older brother too, and they went over every inch of my car with their flashlights while I sat in the truck. They found more scratches underneath the passenger door handle, on the inside of the wheel well, places where someone could theoretically hold on if they were insane enough to try. My brother, always the skeptic, kept insisting there had to be a logical explanation, but even he went quiet when he saw the pattern of the marks, the deliberate nature of them. We decided to leave my car there for the night, and I rode home squeezed between them in the truck, feeling safer than I had in hours, but still checking the side mirrors obsessively. The next morning, we came back with my uncle who was a mechanic, thinking maybe he could find some mechanical explanation for everything. But when we got there, my car had been moved. Not stolen, just moved about 3 spaces over, parked perfectly straight. The attendant from the night before wasn't working, and the day shift guy said the car had been there when he arrived at 6 in the morning, didn't know anything about it being in a different spot. My uncle checked the odometer, and it had 3 extra miles on it. 3 miles when the keys had been in my pocket the entire night. We ended up selling that car to a junkyard 2 days later. I couldn't get back in it, couldn't even look at it without feeling nauseated. My parents helped me buy a different used car, and I finished my last few weeks of college taking completely different routes, always stopping at busy, well-lit stations, never driving alone at night if I could help it. The police report I filed went nowhere. Obviously, just another weird incident without evidence of an actual crime. But about 6 months later, I got a call from a detective in a town about 50 miles from where I'd stopped that night. They'd arrested some guy who'd been breaking into cars at rest stops, and when they searched his apartment, they found hundreds of photos printed out. Photos of car doors, passenger side specifically, taken from weird low angles. Photos of women driving alone at night, taken through their passenger windows. And in one box, they found a collection of car registration papers and insurance cards, all from different vehicles. all belonging to young women. Mine was in there, even though I knew for certain it had been in my glove compartment when I'd sold the car. The detective said the guy wouldn't talk, wouldn't explain anything, just kept saying he liked to practice. Practice what? Nobody knew. They could only charge him with the break-ins they could prove, and he got 18 months. He's out now, somewhere, and sometimes I wonder if he's found a new gas station to hang around, if he's still practicing whatever the hell he was practicing for. Last summer, right after my 21st birthday, I picked up night shifts at this rundown gas station about 40 miles outside of Tucson. The place sat on Highway 89, one of those stretches where you could drive for an hour without seeing another soul. My shift ran from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and honestly, most nights I'd see maybe 3 or 4 customers tops. The owner, this old guy named Frank, paid me under the table, which worked great since I needed quick cash for my student loans. The station itself was nothing special, just 2 pumps, a small convenience store area with flickering fluorescent lights, and a bathroom that constantly smelled like bleach no matter how much I cleaned it. I usually spent my shifts reading paperbacks or watching YouTube videos on my phone, trying to stay awake while the desert wind rattled the windows. It was a Wednesday night in July when he walked in, and the first thing I noticed was his feet, completely bare, caked in this reddish desert dust that left prints across the white linoleum floor I'd just mopped an hour earlier. The guy looked maybe 35, wearing jeans and a plain white t-shirt that hung loose on his skinny frame. His hair stuck up in weird angles like he'd been sleeping outside, and there was this layer of dust covering him from head to toe, as if he'd been rolling around in the dirt. But what really got me were his eyes, wide open, unblinking, just staring straight at me as he walked up to the counter. Not aggressive or anything, just this steady, unnatural gaze that made me want to look away. The doorbell had chimed when he entered, that annoying electronic beep that played every time someone came in, and I remember thinking how loud it seemed in the quiet store. He walked straight to the counter, no browsing, no looking around, just this direct path like he knew exactly where he needed to go. When he got close, maybe 3 feet away, he stopped and just stood there, those eyes still wide open, not blinking even once. I waited for him to say something, to ask for cigarettes or gas or whatever, but he just stared. After what felt like forever but was probably 10 seconds, I cleared my throat and asked if I could help him. That's when he tilted his head slightly, like a dog hearing a strange noise, and said in this flat, emotionless voice, "You've seen me before, haven't you?" I told him no. I didn't think so, trying to keep my voice steady, even though something about him was making my skin prickle. He didn't respond, just kept staring, and I swear to God, his eyes never closed, not even for a split second. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and I could hear the ice machine in the back corner cycling on. These normal sounds that suddenly seemed too loud in the silence between us. Without breaking eye contact, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, placing it on the counter with deliberate slowness. "1 lighter," he said, pointing at the display behind me where we kept the cheap Bic lighters. I turned around to grab a blue one, and when I looked back, he was leaning over the counter, his face maybe a foot from where mine had been, still with those unblinking eyes. The smell hit me then. Not body odor exactly, but this weird metallic scent mixed with dust and something else I couldn't place, like burnt rubber maybe. I rang up the lighter, trying to act normal. Told him it was $3.49 and started counting out his change. The whole time, he kept repeating that same question in a whisper. "You've seen me before, haven't you? You've seen me before, haven't you?" Over and over, like a broken record, never changing his tone or inflection. I practically threw his change on the counter, just wanting him gone. $16.51 scattered across the scratched Formica surface, and he didn't even look at it. Instead, he picked up the lighter, held it up to the light like he was examining a diamond, then flicked it on. The small flame reflected in his unblinking eyes, creating these orange dots in his pupils that made him look even more unsettling. "Fire remembers," he said, still staring at the flame. "Even when people forget." Then he lowered the lighter, clicked it off, and slipped it into his pocket. He turned to leave, and I watched him walk toward the door, those dusty footprints marking his path. But right before he reached it, he stopped and looked back at me over his shoulder. "You'll see me again," he said. Not like a threat exactly, but like he was stating a simple fact, like telling me the sun would rise tomorrow. The doorbell chimed as he pushed through, and I watched through the window as he walked past the gas pumps and disappeared into the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. I stood there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened. My first thought was drugs, had to be meth or something worse. People came through sometimes, all kinds of messed up, talking nonsense and acting paranoid. But this felt different somehow. Those eyes, the way he never blinked, not once in the entire 5 or 6 minutes he was in the store. I grabbed the mop to clean up his dusty footprints, and that's when I glanced at the security monitor mounted on the wall behind the register. We had 3 cameras, one on the pumps, one on the store entrance, and one on the counter area. The counter camera feed showed me mopping, normal as could be. But there, in the exact spot where the barefoot man had been standing, I could still see him on the screen. Not a frozen image or a glitch. He was moving slightly, that same subtle sway he'd had while standing there, the timestamp at the bottom continuing to advance in real time. I dropped the mop handle, and it clattered against the floor, the sound echoing through the empty store. My heart was pounding as I leaned closer to the monitor, thinking maybe it was just a smudge on the screen, or my eyes playing tricks after staring at those fluorescent lights too long. But no, there he was, clear as day, standing at my counter, even though I could see with my own eyes that the space was empty. On the screen, his mouth was moving, and though there was no audio on our cheap security system, I could tell he was still repeating that question. His lips formed the same words over and over. "You've seen me before, haven't you?" I reached out and tapped the monitor, then hit the side of it like people used to do with old TVs. But nothing changed. The image stayed there, him standing at my counter, head tilted at that weird angle. Those eyes still wide open and unblinking even in the grainy black and white footage. I grabbed my phone and called Frank, even though I knew he'd be pissed about being woken up at 2 in the morning. It rang 4 times before he answered, voice thick with sleep and irritation. I tried to explain what was happening, but I could tell he thought I was either high or messing with him. "Just restart the system," he grumbled. "The button's under the counter, red switch next to the safe." I found it and flipped it off, counted to 10 like he said, then turned it back on. The monitors went black, then flickered back to life one by one. The pump camera showed the empty lot, the entrance camera showed the door, and the counter camera showed him. Still there, still swaying, still mouthing those words. But now something else was wrong. In the footage, I could see myself behind the counter, but I was just standing completely still, not moving at all, even though I was actually pacing back and forth, waving my arms to test it. The next 3 hours were the longest of my life. I tried everything I could think of, unplugging the monitor completely, covering the camera with tape, even pulling up the security footage on the ancient computer in the back office. Every screen showed the same thing. Him standing there, me frozen behind the counter like a mannequin. The really messed up part was that customers came in during that time. A trucker getting coffee around 3:30, a woman buying cigarettes just after 4. And on the monitor, they appeared normal, moving around, interacting with the real me who wasn't showing up properly on camera. But he stayed there in the footage, and they walked right through him like he was a ghost, never acknowledging his presence. When I served them in real life, I kept glancing at the monitor, and each time I did, his head would turn slightly on the screen to follow my movement. Those unblinking eyes tracking me even though he wasn't really there. Around 5 in the morning, something changed. On the monitor, the frozen version of me suddenly started moving, but it wasn't mimicking what I was actually doing. Instead, it walked around the counter and stood next to the barefoot man. They both stared directly at the camera, at me, and then the frozen version of myself started mouthing words too. different words than his, but in the same repetitive pattern. I couldn't make out what my image was saying, but the barefoot man's message changed. Now his lips were forming new words. "You'll remember me now." Then both figures on the screen turned and walked toward the door. The monitor showed them leaving, the doorbell image lighting up on the entrance camera as they exited. But here's the thing. The actual doorbell in the store never rang. I stood there watching the parking lot camera as they walked past the pumps and into the desert, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. The monitors went back to normal after that, showing me in real time, moving when I moved, everything synced up perfectly, like nothing had ever been wrong. When Frank showed up at 6:45 to relieve me, I tried explaining everything again, but he just rolled his eyes and blamed it on the old equipment. "This system's from 2001, he said, checking the register. "Probably needs replacing anyway." He didn't care about the dusty footprints, which had dried into this weird reddish stain on the linoleum that wouldn't come clean no matter how hard I scrubbed. He didn't want to review the footage either, said he had better things to do than watch security videos of nothing. I left that morning exhausted and confused, driving home as the sun came up, trying to convince myself it was just some elaborate prank or maybe I dozed off and dreamed the whole thing. I quit that job 3 days later, told Frank my class schedule had changed and I couldn't do nights anymore. But here's what still gets me, what made me write this whole thing down. About a month later, I was shopping at a Walmart on the other side of town, middle of the afternoon, broad daylight, normal day. I was in the camping section looking at flashlights when I saw him 3 aisles over. Same dusty bare feet, same white shirt, same unblinking stare. He was holding a camping lantern, studying it like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. And when he noticed me looking, he smiled, the only expression I ever saw him make. He held up the lantern, flicked it on, and mouthed those words again. "You've seen me before." Then he set it down, turned, and walked away. I didn't follow him, didn't call security, didn't do anything except leave my cart right there and walk out. I've never seen him again since then, but sometimes I check security cameras wherever I go. Gas stations, grocery stores, anywhere really, just to make sure my reflection is moving when I move. So far, it always has. So far. The night everything went wrong, I just finished a 16-hour shift at the auto repair shop on Highway 12, about 40 miles outside of Bakersfield. My knuckles were split from wrestling with a stubborn transmission all afternoon, and the only thing keeping me awake was the energy drink I'd grabbed from the vending machine before locking up. The shop sits in this weird dead zone between 2 small towns, surrounded by nothing but almond orchards and empty fields that stretch for miles. Most nights, I'd be the only car on that stretch of road for the entire drive home. Just me and whatever podcast I had queued up to keep me company. My girlfriend always hated when I took these late shifts, said 32 was too old to be destroying my body for overtime pay, but the bills weren't going to pay themselves. I pulled into the Texaco station about halfway home, the one with the flickering sign that management never bothered to fix. The place always gave me weird vibes, especially at night when the fluorescent lights made everything look washed out and sickly. There was just one other vehicle there when I rolled up. This beat-up green pickup truck from the 70s, maybe a Dodge with rust eating through the wheel wells and a cracked windshield held together with duct tape. The thing looked like it had been driven through hell and back, mud caked on the tires and scratches all along the side panels. I remember thinking whoever owned it must work construction or farming, one of those jobs where your vehicle takes a beating every single day. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside, which seemed pointless for such a piece of junk. I went inside to pay for gas and grab a coffee, nodding at the kid behind the counter who couldn't have been older than 19. The store smelled like old hot dogs and that weird cleaning solution they use in gas station bathrooms. While the coffee machine sputtered out something that barely qualified as coffee, I noticed through the window that someone had gotten into the green truck. The driver's door was open, dome light on, but whoever it was stayed hidden behind that dark tinting. I could only make out a pair of work boots planted on the pavement, big ones, maybe size 13 or 14, with red clay caked in the treads. The boots didn't move the entire time I stood there waiting for my coffee to finish brewing. Just stayed perfectly still, like whoever was sitting there was watching something, or someone. When I walked back out to pump my gas, the truck's door was closed again. The engine was running now, rough and uneven, like it needed a tune-up bad. I could hear it knocking from 20 feet away, that distinctive sound of an engine running on maybe 5 out of 6 cylinders. Being a mechanic, those sounds always bugged me, like hearing nails on a chalkboard. I pumped my $30 worth while trying not to stare at the truck, but I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision. The driver kept adjusting something on the dashboard, these quick, jerky movements that didn't seem natural. After I finished pumping and got back in my car, the truck's headlights suddenly flicked on, those old-style round ones that threw out yellow light instead of white. They lit up my entire car interior for a second before dimming back down to normal. I pulled out of the station and merged back onto the highway, checking my phone at the red light to see 3 missed calls from my girlfriend. The clock on my dashboard read 11:47 p.m., which meant she was probably asleep by now anyway. About a mile down the road, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Nothing unusual about that, except these were those same yellow headlights from the gas station, sitting maybe 3 car lengths behind me. The truck was keeping perfect pace, maintaining that exact distance no matter how I adjusted my speed. When I pushed it up to 70, the truck sped up. When I dropped down to 55 to test it, those headlights slowed right down with me. The really weird part was how the driver kept flashing the high beams in this pattern. 2 long flashes, 3 short ones, then nothing for about 30 seconds before starting over again. At first I tried to convince myself it was just someone else heading home late, maybe drunk, and not realizing they were tailgating. But drunk drivers don't maintain perfect following distance for 10 miles straight. They don't match your speed changes with that kind of precision. Around mile marker 47, I decided to take the exit for Millerton Road, even though it added 20 minutes to my drive. The truck followed, taking the curve way too fast, tires squealing against the pavement. That's when I knew for sure this wasn't random. Nobody accidentally follows you off an exit that leads to nothing but farmland and a few scattered houses. My mouth went dry and I could feel sweat starting to soak through my work shirt, despite the AC blasting cold air right at my face. Millerton Road is one of those old farm routes that nobody maintains properly anymore. Potholes everywhere, no streetlights, just endless rows of grapevines on both sides. I knew there was a dirt road shortcut about 2 miles ahead that connected back to the main highway. Used it plenty of times when I wanted to avoid traffic during harvest season. The truck stayed right behind me, close enough now that those yellow headlights filled my entire rear window. I could hear that busted engine getting louder, like the driver was revving it on purpose. Every few seconds, the high beams would flash again, and I started noticing something else in the pattern. The horn would give these tiny chirps between the light flashes, so quiet I almost thought I was imagining it, like whoever was driving was trying to communicate something or just trying to mess with my head. I took the dirt road turn going almost 40, felt my back end slide out before the tires caught traction on the gravel. Dust kicked up everywhere, a thick cloud that should have blocked anyone's vision for at least 10 seconds. This was my chance to get some distance, maybe lose this psycho in the dust and darkness. I killed my headlights and pushed the accelerator down, using just the moonlight to navigate the narrow path between the irrigation ditches. My car bottomed out hard on a deep rut, heard the exhaust scrape against rocks, but I didn't care. Behind me, nothing but darkness and settling dust. No yellow headlights, no engine noise, just the sound of gravel under my tires and my own breathing. I kept driving for another minute before I couldn't take it anymore. Had to know if I'd actually lost him. I pulled over near an old water tower that hadn't been used since the drought started, turned off the engine completely. The silence hit me like a physical thing, just crickets and the ticking of my engine cooling down. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes watching my mirrors, listening for any sound of that broken engine. Nothing came. My phone showed no signal out here, which didn't surprise me, but it meant calling for help wasn't an option. I started to laugh, this nervous, shaky sound that didn't even sound like me. Here I was, a grown man hiding in the dark from some random creep in a pickup truck. My girlfriend was right. I needed to find a different job, something with normal hours where weird shit like this didn't happen. Finally worked up the nerve to start the car again. Figured I'd drive straight to the police station instead of going home. That's when I saw them in my rear window reflection. 2 yellow circles floating in the darkness maybe 10 feet behind my car. The truck was there, engine completely off, just sitting in the middle of the dirt road like it had materialized out of thin air. No dust cloud, no sound of approach, nothing. The headlights weren't even on. What I was seeing was the reflection of my own taillights bouncing off those round glass lenses. My whole body went rigid, couldn't move, couldn't even turn around to look directly. Then I heard the driver's door creak open, those same heavy boots from the gas station hitting the gravel with a wet thud. The footsteps started coming closer, slow and deliberate, dragging slightly like one leg was longer than the other. Each step made this weird squelching sound, like the boots were soaked through with something thick. The footsteps stopped right beside my driver's side door. I could see a shadow through my peripheral vision, tall and wrong somehow, like the proportions weren't quite human, even though they had to be. There was this smell too, seeping through my closed windows, motor oil mixed with something organic and rotten, like roadkill that had been baking in the sun for days. Then came the tapping on my window, not knocking, but light taps with what sounded like metal, maybe a ring or a tool. The tapping had a rhythm to it, the same pattern as those high beam flashes from earlier. I finally forced myself to turn my head, and what I saw didn't make sense. The person standing there wore mechanics coveralls just like mine, same blue color, same company logo on the chest, but the face was all wrong. Features blurred like I was looking at them through frosted glass, except for the eyes which were too bright, reflecting light that wasn't there. The worst part was the smile, too wide and showing too many teeth, all of them filed down to points like some kind of animal. My survival instinct finally kicked in and I cranked the ignition, slammed the car into drive and floored it. The tires spun on the gravel before catching, and I shot forward into the darkness. In my mirror, I saw the figure just standing there in the road, not moving, not trying to get back to the truck. I drove like a maniac for the next 10 minutes. Took 3 wrong turns on purpose, doubled back twice, anything to make sure nothing was following me. When I finally made it home at almost 2 a.m., I sat in my driveway for another hour with all the doors locked, watching the street. I called in sick for the next 3 days, couldn't bring myself to drive that route again. Never saw that green truck again. Never figured out what that person wanted or why they were wearing coveralls from my shop. But sometimes, late at night when I'm closing up, I still hear that pattern in random sounds. 2 long, 3 short, and it makes every muscle in my body tense up. I had been on the road for hours, heading toward a small town where my aunt's funeral was supposed to take place that morning. The highway felt endless, a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt swallowed by the dark. My car's dashboard clock glowed faintly, showing just past 4, and the horizon was still ink black with only a thin suggestion of dawn. I had not seen another car in what felt like ages, just a long stream of power lines vanishing into nothing. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. My gas light had been on for a while, and I kept telling myself there had to be a station soon. When the car sputtered and coasted to a stop, it was as if the air itself got heavier. I sat there for a second, staring at the steering wheel, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. Outside, everything looked washed out, the kind of dim light that makes it impossible to tell whether it's night ending or morning beginning. I stepped out and leaned against the door, breathing in the smell of dust and cold metal. The road stretched both ways, straight as a ruler, with not a single sign of life. Then I saw it, a small flicker of light far ahead, a faint buzzing glow like an old neon sign fighting to stay alive. The station looked like something abandoned decades ago. The single gas pump stood crooked, paint peeling, the kind of green you only see on things that have been forgotten for years. The sign above the door said, "Open," but one letter blinked slower than the rest, giving it this strange, uneven pulse. The glass door was streaked with dust, and behind it I could make out shelves filled with faded snack boxes, a cooler with a layer of frost around the edges, and a rotary phone sitting on a counter. Everything about the place felt wrong for this time, like stepping into a photograph that someone had forgotten to update. I pushed the door open, and the little bell above it let out a weak jingle that seemed to echo forever. The air smelled stale, like old coffee and cardboard. The man behind the counter didn't move at first. He was hunched over a ledger, his thinning gray hair sticking up at odd angles, wearing a shirt that looked 2 sizes too big. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were dull and tired, but there was a sharpness under them, like he was suddenly awake. His voice came out slow and rasped, "You came back?" For a second I thought maybe he had mistaken me for someone else. I told him no, I had never been there before, that I just ran out of gas and needed to make a call. He just stared, like he was trying to decide if I was lying or confused. I stepped closer, pointing at the rotary phone on the counter. "Can I use that?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but my voice came out thinner than I meant. He didn't answer right away, just slid the phone toward me with 2 fingers, his gaze never leaving my face. The silence in that room pressed against me harder than the night outside. The phone worked, somehow. I heard the faint hum of a dial tone, but when I called the roadside assistance number on my card, it rang endlessly without anyone picking up. I tried again. Same thing. The man leaned on the counter, watching. Then he asked, "Did you ever find your brother?" His words hit me like a slap. I blinked at him, my mouth dry. "I don't have a brother," I said, and he tilted his head slightly, like I'd told a joke he didn't get. He reached under the counter and pulled out a crumpled slip of paper, an old gas receipt yellowed at the edges. He flattened it with his hand, sliding it across the counter toward me. "You signed this," he said. I glanced down, ready to correct him, until I saw my own name printed at the bottom, in that neat thermal ink font every station uses. The date was exactly 1 year before that day. I stared at it for what felt like forever, my thoughts tangling up in disbelief. "This isn't possible," I whispered. He just shrugged. "You said the same thing last time," he murmured, almost to himself, and looked past me toward the window, as if expecting someone to walk through the door. The sign outside flickered again, casting his face in flashes, calm, then shadowed, then bright, like an old movie reel skipping frames. I felt the air change, colder, heavier. I asked where he got that receipt, but he didn't answer. He reached for something under the counter, slow and deliberate. The sound of a drawer sliding open echoed in the stillness. I took a step back, the floor creaking under my boots. When he looked up again, he was holding an old Polaroid photo. He placed it beside the receipt. "This was you," he said quietly. The picture showed a woman standing next to the same gas pump outside, the one leaning at that strange angle. Her car was the same make and color as mine, same dent near the rear bumper. But what made my breath catch was her face. She looked exactly like me, down to the small scar near my eyebrow I had since childhood. I stepped closer to the photo, almost convinced it was some sort of trick, but the paper was old, yellowed, and curling at the corners. The man's hands trembled slightly as he pulled them away from the counter. "You always say that," he muttered. "Every year, right before dawn." I told him I was leaving, that there had to be another station nearby. He didn't try to stop me, but as I turned toward the door, he said, "You will not remember this by the time the sun is up." His tone was flat, resigned, like someone repeating a line they had said 1,000 times. Outside, the horizon was turning gray, light spreading low across the asphalt. My car sat there just as I left it, but when I tried the ignition again, the engine came alive like it had never been empty. The gas gauge showed full. I didn't question it. I just drove. The station disappeared in my rearview mirror quicker than it should have. One blink and it was gone, like the desert had swallowed it whole. When I finally reached town, the streets were still empty, and the church lights flickered on as I parked. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the windshield. My hair smelled faintly like gasoline. When I looked down, the passenger seat had a single slip of paper on it. A receipt, same date as the one from the station. No signature this time. I still have that paper. Every year, around the same time, I find it in a different place. My mailbox, my glove compartment, once inside my jacket pocket. I tried burning it once, but the ink never faded, just turned darker. The funeral feels like a distant blur now, but that morning on the highway remains sharp. I have not driven that route again. Sometimes when I wake before sunrise, I hear that buzzing neon sound in my head, and for a moment I smell dust, gasoline, and the faint echo of a voice asking, "You came back?" There was a kind of quiet that came after midnight at the gas stop where I worked. Not peaceful quiet, the sort that hummed beneath the fluorescent lights and made every sound feel too sharp. The hum of the coolers, the soft click of the pump meters, even the static from the radio behind the counter. All of it built this rhythm that only night shift workers really know. I had been at that station for about a year, pulling the graveyard shift because it paid a little more, and no one else wanted it. Most nights the lot stayed empty except for a few long-haul truckers who stopped for coffee or to use the restroom. But there was one week when something about that quiet felt different, heavier somehow, like the air carried a secret I had not yet understood. The first time I noticed the van, it was parked near the far corner of the lot, where the light from the last lamp barely reached. A white cargo van, plain as can be. No windows on the sides, just a streak of grime down the door and one of those metal ladders bolted to the back. The engine was running, but the headlights were off. I remember thinking it was odd, but people pulled off the interstate to nap or make calls all the time, so I did not give it much thought. Around 3 in the morning, I went out to restock the windshield fluid by the pumps, and the van was still there, idling softly. When I came back an hour later, it was gone. The next night, same thing. Same van, same spot, engine humming, no lights. It looked exactly as before. Even the smear of dirt on the bumper seemed identical. I remember leaning against the counter, watching through the window as condensation formed on the windshield. It never moved. Nobody got out, nobody got in. By the time dawn tinted the sky pink, it was gone again. I told myself it was just a delivery driver catching sleep between runs, but part of me started glancing toward that corner more than I meant to, expecting it. By the 4th night, it was no longer just part of the scenery. It was the thing I noticed first when stepping outside. The air felt colder near that part of the lot, like the warmth from the asphalt did not quite reach it. I remember shining my flashlight across the van once, trying to see inside, but the glare only bounced back at me. No movement, no shadow, nothing. The hum of the engine blended into the background noise of the night until I could barely tell if it was real. What got me was how precise it all was. Always the same time, always the same spot, like someone had drawn a chalk circle, only it could park inside. One evening, a delivery driver named Eli came in for coffee and mentioned he had seen the van pulling in again. He joked about how creepy it looked sitting out there with the engine running, but his laugh trailed off when I did not join in. He asked if I had gone over to check it out. I told him no, it was not my business as long as whoever was inside was paying for gas. He shrugged and left, the bell above the door jingling behind him. I remember standing at the counter, staring at the van through the window, wondering why I could not shake this sense that I was being watched from that shadowed driver's seat. By the 6th night, I had convinced myself I would walk over there. It was just curiosity mixed with a growing unease that had been building all week. Around 2 in the morning, I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, the air damp and cold enough to sting my fingertips. Each step across the lot echoed in the stillness louder than I expected. When I reached the van, the engine was running, the faint vibration pushing through the soles of my shoes. I tapped lightly on the driver's window. Nothing. I circled to the back, but there were no plates, just a strip of duct tape covering where they should have been. I remember that small detail vividly because it felt deliberate, like whoever drove it did not want to be found. When I told my manager the next day, she called the local police. They said they would send someone to check it out, but no one came that night, and I ended up doing my shift as usual. The van returned again, same hour, same corner. This time I stayed inside, keeping one eye on it through the glass door. The hum of the motor blended into everything else, until after a while, I could not hear it anymore. Just silence. I waited, expecting someone to get out, but nothing moved. When the first hint of sunrise hit the lot, the van was gone again. The following night, the officers finally arrived. 2 patrol cars rolled in around 2:30, red and blue lights bouncing off the windows. I watched from the counter as they approached the van, flashlights cutting through the dark. They stood there for a long time before one of them motioned to the other. A few minutes later, the older officer walked inside and asked if I had called. I nodded and he told me I might want to stay behind the counter. His tone was calm but strange, that kind of practiced calm that only makes you more nervous. The officers opened the driver's door, and one of them stepped back fast, covering his mouth. I caught a glimpse when the flashlight shifted. The man inside was slumped over the wheel, skin gray, eyes half open like he had been staring at nothing for a very long time. The engine was still running, which made no sense because it must have been going for days. The smell hit next, faint but enough to make my throat tighten. They taped off the area, called in more units, and I watched from the window as they opened the back of the van. One of the officers whistled low, like he had just seen something worse than the body itself. Later, one of them came inside to take my statement. He told me there were stolen electronics hidden in a false floor in the van. Hundreds of phones, cameras, tablets, things still sealed in boxes. The driver's wallet had no ID, no license, nothing that could tell them who he was. They guessed he had been part of a theft ring, maybe transporting stolen goods along the interstate. They said the cause of death looked natural, but there was no telling how long he had been sitting there before anyone noticed. He had probably died days before I even saw him the first time. That thought has never left me. I had walked past that van every single night, sometimes close enough to touch the door, completely unaware that someone was dead inside. Every time I stepped out to sweep the lot or refill the washer fluid, I must have been within a few feet of him. The idea sits heavy even now, that something so awful could exist quietly in plain sight, while I went about my routine pretending the world made sense. For a long time after that week, I kept expecting to see headlights pull into that same corner again, engine humming softly in the dark. I do not work there anymore, but when I pass by that exit on the interstate, I still glance toward the gas stop without meaning to. The light pole where the van used to sit flickers sometimes, or maybe it always did, and I just never noticed before.